got a big one tonight. Sam Darnold to Carolina Panther. Hubert Davis replaces Roy Williams. The injury bug is stuck at the Hive, and we're talking Hurricanes hockey with Abby Labar. This is Ground Score. Welcome into Ground Score. Oh boy, we got a big show today. Something we did not expect to happen. And I want to let you know why these two guys are the best two co-hosts you can have. Earlier today, Reggie and I taped what we thought was going to be our full episode talking Hornets. We had Abby Labar on, or we will have her on. We're talking Hurricanes, and we thought that was it. That was the show. Then I'm in the middle of Harris Teeter, and I get a text message saying that Carolina has traded for Sam Darnold. Of course, my co-hosts are John Ellis and Reggie Walker, but I'm just so fired up about this trade. He's been my dark horse to come here for months. I've had no reason to think that. But now Sam Darnold is a Panther. In return to New York, a 6th-round pick for 2021, a 2nd-round pick, and a 4th-round pick for next year. Immediate reaction. Somebody go.
I love the aggression by the organization. I think being aggressive, Fitterer made the comments that he's going to be in on everything. I like the aggression by this team. I like the fact that they're going for it, if you will. And so from that standpoint, I think it's encouraging to know that they are willing to pull the trigger. Now, I say all that to say there's still some pieces to this that have to get solved. First and foremost, now, what do you really do with that number 8 overall pick? Is it a weapon, or is it making sure that offensive line is fixed with an anchor on it, particularly at left tackle? Because now you've just went and gotten Sam Darnold. So theoretically, at worst case scenario, this is a 2-year rental, right?
At worst case, because they're going to pick up the 5th-year option.
And you would think they would pick up the 5th-year option. But if they don't protect him and he looks bad because he's continuing to climb off the ground like Teddy did, like Cam did before him, then what have you really done? You've given up additional picks to be in the same position potentially at this point next year. So I think it's very important to see what the next steps are in this process. But I like the aggression of making a move.
Yeah, I agree, Reggie. It's not without risk. I mean, it's like any of these moves you make in the NFL, there's always a risk involved. The risk here is obviously you missing out on one of these top 4 quarterbacks, maybe top 5 quarterbacks that it can end up translating into, an all-pro quarterback. And Darnold doesn't pan out here. That's obviously something that you have to keep an eye on. But I think when I talk to people within the league today, I talked to a source within the organization who told me that Sam has been a guy they have loved for a long time in Carolina. They liked him coming out. This is somebody Matt Rule has talked about as well. When he interviewed with the Jets, he was very high on Sam Darnold. So they've done their homework. And it's also important to point out, I said this on our little Periscope chat we did earlier, that you can't put all these quarterbacks in a box and say, the top 4 guys are all on Carolina's list. They obviously did not have a wide spectrum in terms of quarterbacks they valued in that top 10 as much as maybe fans did or we did in the media. So they had a very narrow view on who they wanted. I believe it was Lawrence, and I believe it was Deshaun Watson. There's some reporting today that Aaron Wilson from the Houston Chronicle stating that Carolina up until recent weeks was doing their homework on Watson, trying to figure out a way to make that deal happen. And it just was, obviously, with all that's going on, it wasn't feasible. But
can't touch it now.
No. Darnold to me is got a lot of upside. He's younger. I believe he's younger than Mac Jones. They're the same age.
He's younger than Joe Burrow.
Yeah. So, I like the trade on that regard. He can put it up vertically. He can get it downfield. He was in a dysfunctional situation with Adam Gase. So now he's out of that, a chance to start over with some good weapons. Let's see what the kid can do.
And the first example of that is what happened with Ryan Tannehill after he left Gase's system in Miami. He's flourished in Tennessee, and that he's done great work with the Titans. Darnold has had less and less weapons to work with every year. His top 2 receivers last year were Braxton Berrios and Jamison Crowder. And you're not gonna be able to flourish with those 2 guys.
That's 2017 Panthers bad right there. That's bottom of the barrel.
Those are depth guys that you're going to have. But now, listen, I like the move with Darnold. I think it's good getting him out of New York. I think he's going to have a chance to reset and grow his career. He's going to have weapons now. He's going to have hopefully a healthy Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, who's fantastic, Robbie Anderson. He's maybe Ian Thomas becomes something. He has weapons now. But the next question that leads us to is, John, you said maybe they weren't going to take a quarterback at 8. Maybe they weren't in love with who they had, who might have been available.
I wasn't convinced they were taking a quarterback at 8 either, guys.
But now we're all convinced that they're not taking a quarterback. I mean, they could get a Penny Sewell as their left tackle if he falls to them at 8. They could shore up that secondary that they really need and get a guy like Patrick Surtain. So where do you think that they could go?
I think listen, if you're going to go get a quarterback like this, you better go get an offensive lineman to protect it. Because here's the one thing to me that wouldn't make any sense. To bring him here and I know they've signed some guys in the offseason, so they've addressed the offensive line. But they haven't addressed left tackle. And so if you right. So if you go make that trade like they already did for Sam Darnold, and then you bring him in here and you can't protect your his blind side, and the investment that you just made in several draft picks and probably at least $30 million a year, because I believe the 5th-year option is somewhere around $20 to $25 million a year.
Yeah. His cap hit. I'll stop. Hang on right there, Reg. His cap hit for 2021 is $4.7 million, is according to Spot Rack, and his 5th-year option in 2022 is 18.8.
That's not bad.
You're talking. It's actually not bad. It's actually less than Teddy's.
Yes.
So you're talking about $22 million over the next couple of years at that quarterback position, with Sam Darnold as your guy. You better protect his blind side or you're going to be right back in the damn draft looking for a quarterback because he's going to be halfway to out of the league because he's going to be beat up.
Yep. So where does this spin this forward now? I mean, what happens with Teddy Bridgewater? Ian Rappaport saying he's under the impression that the Carolina's going to try to move him. Yeah. But when they were vocal in the past about saying we're going to move our quarterback, with Cam, it obviously did not work out. I don't see how a team would make it a trade for Teddy Bridgewater right now.
There's no way in hell I'd trade anything knowing that they have to cut him.
Yeah, I think what ultimately will happen is that he will be granted a release.
Well, he won't listen. Reggie, the biz. You guys know he's not going to restructure. Why would he at this point?
I'm not helping. Right.
I wouldn't blame him either. They paid him the contract. He deserves every penny of it. Why restructure when they made it clear they don't want him anymore? It's the same thing with Newton. Probably feels disrespected. I saw Scott Fitterer made the comment in the presser just now. It came through Twitter. Paraphrasing here, we're going to find the right home for Teddy, whether it's here or somewhere else. So what does that tell you?
It's somewhere else.
What does that tell you?
It's somewhere else.
It tells you they're going to end up having to waive him and eat that $20 million cap hit.
That's going to suck. If they do, if they can't find a Denver or somebody that's willing to give them something, 2 years in a row now, they end up on the hook without getting compensation back for their starting quarterback and taking a cap hit like that for Bridgewater. That stinks, but that's the contract they drew up. They can't change that now.
If I'm any other GM in this league, I'll just have to miss on Teddy. I ain't giving you a damn thing.
I can't. I just couldn't.
Yeah, a year ago.
Look, think about it. You just trashed the guy and went and traded for a dude and basically said, we'd rather take a guy out of a dysfunctional situation that's played awful his first 3 years in the league than try to put some things around you. If I'm Teddy, there's no way in hell. And if I'm another GM, I'm going, they're going to have to let him walk. And then I'm just going to slide in there and give him a contract.
Teddy's audition was after he came back from injury last year. Those last years, we talked about it. That was his audition for not only this job, but for other teams out there that were going to look in the market and say, you know what, that's a guy we can make a play for. And he failed that audition. And now, unfortunately, that's part of the business. He gets paid handsomely for it, but he's probably not going to have a starting job next year.
And listen, this move, you think it's got to put some heat on Joe Brady, and it's got to put some heat on Matt Rule, because last year they come in here, new regime, they say Teddy's our guy, we're going to go get Teddy. A year later, they're shoving him out the door. So this move, Brady and Rule, they have to win this deal. They have to win this deal, right?
Meanwhile, you get another young quarterback going into yet another new system early in his career.
It is a system. It's not Adam Gase's dysfunction, so at least there's that. But here's the other thing. How long is Joe Brady going to be here? You got to start thinking globally here. Joe Brady.
That's what I'm saying. I knew you were going to go there. And I say that in a respectful way because that is a very important aspect of this.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and while all this was happening, UNC hired Hubert Davis to replace Roy Williams as the next head coach of their basketball program. Wow. And as a guy grew up a Tar Heel fan and grew up a Knick fan, I'm pumped about Hubert Davis.
I think it's a good hire. I'll just say this, and this was the one concern I had, and people have been asking me about it ever since Roy stepped down. What do you think about Hubert? And the only thing I said was, listen, Hubert's going to have to, if I go by Hubert's words, then Hubert's going to have to change his mind on one thing if he's going to be the head coach at North Carolina. He said he took the job. One of the main reasons he took the job is because Roy Williams promised him he could sleep in his own bed every night. He didn't have to be on the road recruiting 4 or 5 days a week. And look, if you're going to be the head coach, there's going to be some situations where you got to go close. And everybody's quick to say, oh, you just take the private jet back and forth. That sounds good. But you're not going to be doing that 4 or 5 days a week. So at the end of the day, my only question is, if it was Hubert going to be willing to accept, right, what comes with being the head coach, not sleeping in your own bed, working all hours, all those things. If he was willing to say yes, I think he's a great candidate. I think it's a great hire. I like Hubert Davis. He knows the Carolina family. He's been on that bench for the last couple of years. We know he knows basketball. He's a hell of an NBA player.
Yes, he was.
So at the end of the day, those questions don't need to be answered. To me, it was all about whether or not Hubert really wanted to be in this spot. And by obviously him accepting the position, he really wants to be in that spot. And he's willing to do all of those things.
Yeah, I think they could have done a lot worse. He's a UNC guy. It's an in-house type of thing. They keep that momentum going forward. Obviously, he knows Roy well. He knows the program well. And he's had a ton of success in the NBA, understands the college game. I think they could have done a lot worse. I like the move.
Yeah. All right, John, thank you for joining us. Earlier today, we taped the rest of our episode, and we continue now with Hornets talk and Hurricanes with Abby Labar. I don't know how positive we can be about the Hornets right now. They're in a stretch where they've lost 3 out of 5. They've suffered 2 big injuries over the weekend, losing Malik Monk on Friday night, or was it Thursday night, lost Malik Monk in Brooklyn, and then Gordon Hayward goes down with that sprained foot. He's out at least a month. This comes 2 weeks after LaMelo Ball went down with that fractured wrist. The Hornets are kind of 50-50 about his return. I'm a little more pessimistic about it if they make the playoffs, which all of a sudden now seems like a pretty big if.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, one of the things I was looking at with this team was I thought they had a chance to avoid the play-in games, that 7 through 10 situation. And now, losing this kind of firepower for as long as they're losing it, you start to wonder if they're going to fall back to that group, right? You think about it, going into play last night, they were, sitting in the 6th spot, 8.5 games out. But the ironic thing is they're only a half game out of 4.
Yeah.
Going into last night. And again, Milwaukee, they're the 3 seed, but they're sitting there only a game and a half back. Right. Of the 2 teams at the top. But then there's 6.5 games right between them and Atlanta. So it's amazing, how tight that window is. Once you get past that 3 spot, all those teams are jumbled in there together. So they have a chance. And I mean, the positive is they're going to get a chance to play a lot of these teams. The negative is they're going to get a chance to play a lot of these teams that they're battling for without a lot of their top guys. And that to me makes things a lot harder. I mean, you look at this team right now, again, you just mentioned all the guys that are out. Now you can just load up, right? And do your best to shut down, just pick a guy and say, I'm going to shut him down tonight. And there's no other answers on this roster that we've seen consistently put up the numbers. So guys like PJ Washington and Miles Bridges are definitely going to have to step up.
No, you're 100% right. And you've seen with this loaded roster that they've had with LaMelo and Hayward and Malik flourishing, Terry Rozier has really, jumped off the page here and has really made a name for himself this season. But now he's going to get more attention. And like you said, PJ Washington is a guy that's going to have to step up. Miles Bridges is going to have to step up, although I think he's a really fine player. But again, like I said, with that full roster, that gave him more of a time to flourish and grow his game. Because now if you're going to be doubled up on guys like Terry and Devontae, it's time for his game to grow, and it's time for PJ's game to grow, and everybody else on this roster. And all of a sudden, we felt pretty good about this team's playoff chances over the last 2 months of doing this show. And all of a sudden, should the Hornet fans start to worry about maybe the possibility of making the playoffs? I mean, I think they're they're at least going to make the play-in tournament, but should they be worried about falling even further below that?
Well, here's what's funny, Kevin. This is a fan base that I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say everybody, but a decent amount of them at one point going into the season were saying, let's tank again and add another draft pick to LaMelo. Then they realized what LaMelo could be, and then they started screaming, we'll start him and let's try to make a run at it. So I think there are going to be some people that are sort of pushing the let's go ahead and tank button so they can kind of move on to the next thing as opposed to, trying to get this team to fight for that quote unquote 8 seed and get swept or whatever the case. It could be, right? Because we don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. I'm of the mindset that you always try to win. You do your best to win every game. And then if you find a way to get in the playoffs, you try to win in the playoffs. The interesting thing is, if they are able to get LaMelo back, say the last week of the regular season, you know what the good part is, Kevin? There's no chance the kid hits a rookie wall because he just sat out for a month and a half. So guess what? He's going to be fresh. Gordon Hayward, one of the older guys on this roster, he comes back close to the end of the season. All of a sudden, he's rested and healthy and feeling pretty good. So if you look at it from a glass half full standpoint, you're going to get some guys that are more fresh and much more rested going into the playoffs.
Oh, that's a really good point. But these injuries and this roster kind of decimation, if you will, comes just a week or two after the NBA's trade deadline, and a lot of teams that are bunched up with the Hornets, Miami, Boston, Atlanta, they all made moves to improve their roster. I mean, the Hornets made a minor move with getting Brad Wanamaker, which now all of a sudden he's going to see a lot of minutes. But if you look back in hindsight, knowing that they were going to have these injuries, do you think the Hornets may have made more of a move than just getting Brad Wanamaker?
Probably, but I think at the same time, they had to be careful, right? And this is what we always talk about with these contracts is, do you trade a guy and get something back that you don't want to sit on your roster long term? And that's always the battle. And I think differently from a lot of people, and a lot of people tell me I'm crazy when I say this. And I'm going to sort of pose the question to you as we talk about it right now. Why is it that no one feels like letting a guy walk in free agency and getting $20 million of cap space back? Why does everybody feel like that's a failure? Like, I don't understand why that's such a bad thing to let a player move on that's maybe not as good as you thought. Okay. Use the latest example for the Hornets, even though they waived and stretched him. A guy like Nick Batum sat on that $27 million for one more year, and then he walks away and you have $27 million in cap space. Instead, they did a waive and stretch, and they got to pay him this year, next year, and the year after $9 million a piece. So it's an interesting conversation. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm just saying, at least for me, I'm okay taking the cap space.
I agree with you in taking the cap space sometimes, but I think they saw it as a move as, this franchise wanted to get Gordon Hayward a few years ago.
Right.
This was a chance to go out and get, quote unquote, their guy. Right. And in order to do that, we've talked about it. Charlotte is not a destination city, prior to the season. It may be now, if you're a free agent and you look at, see this roster, how well they've done. But I think that move was pretty unique, just to go out and get Hayward in that big sign and trade and signing that big contract. But, it's a pretty good point by you for the getting just the cap space, because, they could have done that with Kemba, but they turned that into a sign and trade as well to get Rozier, and he's done really well here.
Right. And he has played well. Now, I'll say this too. You've got other guys on this roster that you've got to make decisions on. I know everybody loves Cody Zeller, but are you going to pay him $15 million a year again next year and moving forward, right? You're going to find out in this next month if what he can bring to this basketball team, if he deserves, or if you feel like he's worth. I'm not going to say deserves, because that's a whole different conversation. But his value is going to be determined by him during this stretch of games where a lot of guys are out. Same thing with Biz Biyombo. Now, he makes a lot less, right? But if you look at what this team has and some of the salaries, according to Hoops Hype, right? Cody Zeller makes $15 million. Biz makes $3.5 million. Wanamaker's $2.5 million. Devontae Graham's $1.6 million. So you're talking about upwards of $24 million, $24 million of guys that you can really make some true decisions on. Obviously, Malik Monk has that. They can pick up that option on him moving forward for one more year as well. So I think it's interesting, the timing, not necessarily for Malik Monk, obviously, because he's dealing with the injury, but for some of these other guys, look, it's Devontae and Terry Rozier in that backcourt now. We're going to find out if defenses load up on Devontae Graham, what is he really? And guess what? I can surmise this. If he struggles down the stretch with those guys out because defenses are more loaded up to him, pretty much they're probably going to let him walk or try to do some kind of a sign and trade with him in the summer.
You mentioned Cody Zeller, excuse me, and I'm not sure. I don't remember his contract. Is he up after this season, or is he up after next season?
Again, according to Hoops Hype NBA salary, how there's different avenues to use, but everything I've seen shows that Cody is going to be off the books after this season, and he's making 15 this year. Do
you think that the Hornets are showing their hand a little bit because Cody's not starting right now? Biyombo's starting.
Well, I think I think Biz is starting more because of a mindset thing and an age thing. And he's kind of known as the pops on the team. He's the older guy, the wily veteran that guys go fly down to his house in Florida in the offseason and kind of get the sit down talk. Yeah, is he the best player? No, but you have to have a locker room guy. He's the type of guy, for people that to give them a point of reference. He's the Udonis Haslem of the Charlotte Hornets, right? The last 4 or 5 years, Udonis Haslem was nowhere near seeing even the floor. That's a different level with that organization and what the Hornets have been in terms of winning and losing. But they had that guy in the locker room to kind of help the young guys understand how this thing works. So I think that's why Biz is there. But the positive for the Hornets is they can make a decision. It can be either Biz or Cody after this year, or neither. Or they can bring both back if they don't feel like there's anything better out there that they can get. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, I think they're in a pretty good position to potentially not have to put themselves in a bind financially with those two guys over the next few years.
Yeah, I think regardless, they're going to have to address the front court and add some size, for next season, whether that's in the draft or free agency. All right, our guest has entered our chat room, or I guess our waiting room, so to speak. That's the Zoom lingo. Let's talk some hockey with Abby Labar. We welcome in Abby Labar from Bally Sports, who covers the Carolina Hurricanes. Abby, thanks for coming on Crown Score with us.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. I was just told before this that you're a Rangers fan. I don't know if I can get down with that, but it's okay as long as you're cheering for the Hurricanes right now.
I'm cheering for the Hurricanes right now. Of course, except for they're not playing the Rangers this year. Maybe in the playoffs if the Rangers can get there. That's what I'm
saying. So no excuses.
Speaking of that, the right realignment, like the way they, I mean, obviously COVID related, how kind of, I mean, it was one thing everybody's kind of like, what's that going to look like? Okay, now we've seen what it looks like. How has it felt?
Yeah, I personally love it. I'm not the one playing though, but I mean, the guys have said the same thing. I think for them, it's like, everyone's over, and every hockey player can agree no matter what division you're in. I think they're kind of overseeing the same teams over and over again. But at the end of the day, I think what's cool about it, and this was kind of the exciting part coming into the season, is that we got thrown into this central division with some teams from kind of all over. Like there were a couple central teams in there, but then they pulled a couple teams from the Eastern Conference, the Atlantic Division, and then we have some teams from the West. And so the question now is, and the conversation has now become not so much around like the excitement of the new divisions, because we've been playing in them. It's now, okay, what happens come playoffs? And all these teams have not seen the other teams in the other divisions like at all this season. And then you think about, the teams like in the East that are playing like pretty much all the same like divisions and conference teams that they've played in before. And, who are they going to face in the West? Like those are teams that they have not seen, maybe even like over a year, because when you like go back and look at the old schedules and when the pause was. And so I like to say that the Canes have a little bit of an advantage there because we're familiar with a lot of the teams in the Metro, having played them, so much. And then we obviously don't see them this season. But, we know their tendencies. We're familiar with the personnel and the coaching and all that. And so I think a lot of these central teams, yes, the division right now is currently really, really good. But I think these central teams have more of an advantage than the Western Conference or the Eastern Conference, who in the past they've been so used to, seeing all the same teams or whatever, and they're doing that again. So it's been different, but I've liked it. It's fun. It's different.
Yeah. And their most recent game Sunday night, playing Dallas, who was the Western Conference champs last year,
Mhm.
in the same division as Carolina this year. Peter Mrazek made his comeback, pitches a shutout, and now all of a sudden it feels like the Canes have like a 3 goalie carousel with Mrazek and Reimer and Charlotte's former Charlotte checker Alex Nedeljkovic playing so well. Has Rod Brind'Amour kind of hinted on how that's going to work going forward?
I think he is just as not sure as all of us are. We ask him about it a lot. In the back of his mind, I'm sure he has, what his plan looks like, right? But there's a couple different things that you have to look at here. So he was actually asked about it last night after the game, after Peter came back. We try to get him on it anytime that we can, right? And the latest he said was we just kind of need to see how Peter does in the next few games and how comfortable he is and how good he is coming back. Obviously posted a shutout last night, but he didn't see a lot of action. He went through the first 2 periods and the team in front of him played really well. So it wasn't really until the 3rd period where he really saw a lot of shots on goal. So you're going to have to kind of assess how he does in his next few starts and see if he can really pick up right where he left off. And so that's one factor, right? And that's kind of the latest of what Rod said. Let's see where that goes. There's a couple other things too, like Alex Nedeljkovic has been playing phenomenal. I think it's one of those things that kind of surprised everyone a little bit. I mean, it shouldn't have surprised everyone, but I think maybe the coaching staff, it probably surprised a little bit. And so now you're in this situation where you're like, okay, I've had this goaltender that, we didn't know what was going to happen when he started playing, and now he's really good. Okay, now the question is, how does he play in the playoffs? Because goaltending in the playoffs is a whole different beast. And he, helped the Checkers win the Calder Cup. So you could argue, yes, he understands what the playoffs are, but NHL playoffs are a whole different wheelhouse. So there's that side of it, right? Like how does Alex play in the playoffs? Can he handle the workload? I say yes, because of what we've seen. I'm sure you guys would agree.
I agree.
Being in Charlotte, right? All the Checkers fans out there. And then it's as far as the trade deadline goes and the moves that they want to make there, it's interesting. Kind of the conversation around the league has been more that people are going to be more hesitant to make trades this year because of money, and COVID and the salary cap. And, the Canes are in this position where whatever move they make, it's probably going to have to benefit this team to make a run in the playoffs. Like that's what they're looking at. But, I know in the past and in talking with Don Waddell, sometimes it's good to make those hockey player moves as well. Like a guy that you don't just need to rent out, somebody who can be a valuable asset, like going back to your Rangers, Brady Shea, like we acquired Brady Shea.
Great pickup.
Yeah. And it was good for the run, like for the playoffs. Granted, there was like, the pause and everything, but he was great in the playoffs. And now he's a guy that has found a fit here. So the trade deadline is kind of a sticky situation. And that kind of correlates with the goaltending right now, because it is like, do you carry 3? Do you trade 1? And there is so many different things that you have to think about with the salary cap and stuff. I think at the end of the day, if they do trade a goalie away, it's going to be a perfect world scenario for both teams. It's going to be like a right place, the right time, the right money, the right asset. And that's what's going to happen. So I don't have an opinion on it, really. Everyone always asks, like, well, okay, what do you think the Canes should do?
Right.
Because having 3 goaltenders is great, but in the National Hockey League, sometimes it's not feasible. Well, it isn't feasible in this situation, though, with the calendar and the way the games just keep coming and coming and coming. That's kind of the third thing too you have to think about, right? Like, yeah, in a perfect world, it's great to have 3 goaltenders that you can rely on, especially if somebody gets hurt again. But you have 1 goaltender that's not going to be getting as many practice reps, right? You have to sit that guy. And you can't, it's really hard to split 3 goaltenders at practice when you only have an hour of practice and 2 nets. And these guys aren't really practicing as much right now because it's just so taxing on their bodies. And then like last night, they had James Reimer on the bench backing up Peter Mrazek. Do you do that every time, or do you switch out Reimer and Ned? I don't know. So, so many different like ways to go with it. What do you guys think? What is you guys?
Well, I'll say this too. I think it's also, and Kevin, you know where I'm going with this as a hockey guy myself, not quite like Kevin with hockey, but a hot goaltender in the playoffs, you better have, if you think you're going to win the cup. And Sometimes it's harder to find who that's going to be. Where's that rhythm coming from? To your point, if guys are missing or not able to have so much time, whether it's in practice or in games down the stretch of the regular season.
I mean, when the Canes won their cup, they rode Cam Ward all the way in 2006.
Well, what's not to say you throw, because Peter Mrazek is a different beast in the playoffs too. Like we've seen what he's been able to do in the last couple of seasons. What's not to say you put Ned in? What if Ned's the guy? Like there's
could be
ball there. Like what if Ned is just totally a playoff goaltender? Like, but that's you have to roll the dice, right? Like, because then it could be the complete opposite.
I mean,
that'd be a great surprise or a very bad nightmare.
I mean, I saw a 3-goalie rotation last year myself as a Ranger fan with Georgiev and Shesterkin and Henrik Lundqvist, and it was watching Lundqvist do it for so many years and just seeing him sitting on the bench. It felt kind of awkward, to be honest with you.
Well, the good thing is this is a Carolina-based podcast, so I can ask you this question: when are any of your teams going to get their act together, Kev? We need to get New York right.
Hey, it's baseball season. We got the Yankees.
I knew that was coming. See?
Oh, I thought you were going to say you had the Mets. I was like,
no. Abby, this team 2 years ago had that great run to the Eastern Conference Final, and it seems like they've been playing great, sustained hockey since then. I mean, how has this team bought into Rod Brind'Amour's philosophy, and who, in your opinion, has been the biggest key contributor since?
Oh man, I mean, Rod Brind'Amour, it's not even that he has a philosophy, right? It's just because he's Rod Brind'Amour. Like the respect, like the culture, the respect, it's like this natural, like everyone respects him and looks up to him and they listen to him and they want to play hard for him. And it's everything that like he embodies as a person and he embodied as a player. He just walks into the locker room and everyone just feels it. Like he doesn't even really have to say anything, it's just because you're out there playing for a guy that lived and breathed success, in the NHL and at such a high level. And so the one thing that I love and that I think we're seeing a lot of, especially in this unique season where it's not just physically taxing, it's mentally taxing, right? I use this example. I always go back to it. Because it was like something that Rod said and it clicked with me and I'm like, this makes sense. This is it. Like, this is how it's coming full circle. There was so much excitement around him the first couple of years, but when he goes out and gets players, him and Don Waddell, whether they're signing free agents, they're making trades or, they're developing guys at the younger level. When we were asking about Vincent Trocheck, like what has made him so successful this year? Like, why has he, been so good? And, Rod said, going back like way before the trade deadline when we acquired him, I always watched Florida and I thought he was a guy that competes. And for me, it's the intangibles, that competitive ability. And so you're seeing all these players come into this locker room and they all have this intangible that Rod Brind'Amour and Don Waddell look for, that work ethic and that compete level. And it's the cliche of like, what is it? Talent don't work hard until like whatever, you work harder, like the will before the skill. There's like that one quote I'm trying to think of. It's the will before the skill. And so no matter how talented these guys are, and even the guys that are really talented, they are continuing to put in the extra work day in and day out. And they stay on the ice, way after practice is done, they're coming out before. And like that, I think is what not necessarily Rod Brind'Amour's like, they've just bought into that whole like culture. And I think that's why we're seeing the success that we are as they continue to plow through this season. So
I'm not going to put you on the spot as it comes to the Canes specifically, because I just don't think that's fair. Okay. But I will ask you about the trade deadline in a very general way. You think it'll be very busy and active right there at the end?
I would have thought, honestly, it would have come like earlier. Like I'm still like every day, like checking my phone and trying to talk to people like ahead, like now, because, and I don't know how much, like, I think the quarantine rules are a little more lifted. I think it's probably changed a little bit from a Canes perspective because you have to look at like, who do they currently have? Like last week, they didn't have Vincent Trocheck and they didn't have Peter Mrazek. So that's when you could have thought, okay, they're going to do something and they're going to do something soon. Well, now Vincent's back. He hasn't missed a beat. You give Mrazek a few games, kind of see how he goes. And then you have to reassess the group as a whole. I think the league it's hard. Like the trade stuff it's a toss up, and it's like, again, I think it's one of those situations where it's like right place, right time, right situation. And so it wouldn't surprise me if it's the day of. I mean, we've done that. The Canes have done that in the past. They've waited until the last minute, to make those moves. But I would have thought this specific season, it would be earlier than right at the end.
Yeah,
because
I agree
you want to get these guys acclimated too, right? Especially in the Canes situation, you would think they're trying to make a run. So they want to bring somebody into the locker room sooner than later to go ahead and get them established with the team and the system. Because then the longer you wait, the later they get there and get in the locker room with the team. So that from a Kane standpoint, an outside perspective, like that's what I kind of like look at. And that's really just kind of my opinion. It's different for these teams that aren't making a run. You can wait as long as you want to make those trades and those decisions, right? Because for them, it's those hockey moves, and it's just trying to make their teams better. And it doesn't really matter how the timing works.
I have two more quick questions for you. I have yet to see a game at PNC. I'm sure there are plenty in Charlotte who haven't made that trek over on 95. I've seen the Canes at the Garden. I've seen the first time I ever saw them was January of '96 when they were the Hartford Whalers in Hartford. Yeah, that's to date myself a little bit. But for someone who hasn't been to a game at PNC, like what it is at full capacity, what is that experience like?
It is like, it's unreal. Like my ears are like ring after the game. And so my old, like when I was in the in-game host, my old position, I was like down in one of the corners, like right on the glass. And like, I had like this little stage set up, and like the fans were like really, really close to me, but I was in it. Like I was right there in it. And I would walk out of the arena and my ears it would be hard to hear. Like I would have ringing ears probably for like 30 minutes after I would leave the arena. Like insane, like chills. Like, I mean, these fans are like on their feet, and you guys get that in Charlotte. I feel like it's just like North Carolina. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess like I'm trying to think. I guess you guys, the Hornets.
We had the Panthers too, but the first Hornets game I went to when I was down here, it was a very different experience. It was. But
okay,
I'm used to going to the Garden, and so it was a little bit of a decline. But I think the when I watch on TV, it seems like the atmosphere at a Hurricanes game is significantly better than Charlotte.
It helps when you have success.
I guess I was going to the point of like, I grew up in Charlotte, and like my dad is a big Panthers fan, and I feel like North Carolina, and like I'm an NC State fan, and so like you don't have teams that are like winning all the time. I guess that's the best way to put it, right?
That's the best way to put it.
And that's how the Canes were for so long. So you have like, imagine like the Panthers and the Hornets fans, and like all the, like, there's still people that go to the games and stick with these teams, and then they start winning. Like, that's what it is. Like, these fans have waited so long for success, and they're so passionate about their teams, even in the, like, those losing streaks in that years where they're not, even though it's not as crazy in the building, there's not as many people, like, you still have your teams that you want to, cheer about. And so it's like, it's just like another level. I can't even explain it. Like, these people are just so, like, the fans are just so insane. And like, I think the tailgating definitely helps. Like, the fact that we tailgate for hockey games, like, that absolutely has something to do with it, because no other hockey team, I don't think, does the whole tailgating thing like, Raleigh, North Carolina does. So you have people out in the parking lots at 10 a.m. for a 7 p.m. playoff.
Those are my kind of people.
Like, that's all I have to say. That's
my kind of people.
In a lot of people's defense, many hockey cities don't have the kind of weather that Raleigh has in the middle of January and February.
Exactly.
Yeah, can't do that in New York.
Yeah, and then come playoff time, it's like spring, so it's nice. Like June,
sundresses and tank tops and dudes are out there with no shirt on, running around the parking lot.
And then they'll go into a whole cold hockey rink still without the shirt on. That's when you're like, all right.
I mean, speaking of things you may not be able to explain, I was watching one of your broadcasts about a month ago, and the Canes were on the road, and you were hosting in PNC, and behind you was the Pittsburgh Panthers men's college basketball team practicing. Was that like the most peak pandemic thing? Like, have you ever experienced like a weird moment like that in a broadcast ever?
100%. I'm like, so what happened was we had like one of the security guys walks up like right before we're supposed to like go on, or like the show's about to start or whatever. And he's like, hey, like, cause they like control the lights behind us or something. And the lights were off. That's what happened. The lights were like dimmed. And the security guy comes up and he's like, hey, we need to turn the lights on behind you guys. Like basketball practice is about to happen. So I'm thinking like, oh, that's cool. Like NC State basketball practice. But we're also like, okay, like, I guess there's going to be basketball behind us. So we're like fully prepared for like NC State basketball to show up behind us. And then it's not even NC State. It's like, yeah, like Pittsburgh coming in from like being on the road. Like that's not NC State. That's blue and yellow. And then it just like happened to work out perfectly that we were playing the Panther, like the Canes were playing the Panthers. And I was like, absolutely, this is the most pandemic thing. But I love that it just happened to work out. Like, oh, the Panthers are playing behind us while the Canes are playing the Panthers. It was funny. I don't know I would love to know what they thought. Like walking in and being like, what's going on up there? You know?
Well, I guess the only good thing about it is at least you know that it was a couple of Carolina guys, because the Capos are with Pitt. So I guess there's just dudes that wanted to come home. I don't know.
Oh, it was weird. That was weird.
Well, I mean, thank you for coming on. You and Mike Maniscalco and Trip Tracy and Shane Willis, you put together a great telecast every night for the fans, and you guys do such a good job. And I hope you're poised for another deep playoff run.
I hope that is what's going to happen too. And I hope we can get more fans in the building for it. So if we can, you guys will have to come up and check it out. Because
I would love to.
Yeah.
I'm on my way, Abby.
Thank you. Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
I tell people who haven't seen a hockey game in person to go see it, especially a playoff game. It's
funny.
It's amazing.
Like I always I didn't cover hockey, but I wasn't a big hockey fan before I started working for the Canes. And I tell people that all the time. Like I'm like, so it's such a contagious, like as soon as you go to one game or like see like an experience like hockey in North Carolina and Hurricanes hockey, like you get addicted very quickly. So it's unlike anything else. You guys will love it.
Amazing. Well, I hope to get there soon. Abby, thanks for coming on, and we'll see you next week on Next Ground Score.